Now I remember I used to go to the office stores, and there was a proprietary program for anything you would want to do, just sitting there on the shelf. That is no longer the case. There was also a game of any type you would want. That's no longer the case. But that is the case in the open source and free software world right now. Secondly, most of these programs also run on Windows. Qt and GTK2 as well as GTK1 run fine on Windows. If you were a business person, software development, a business where the cost of reproduction is so very low, a business that used to be a good business, that field is closed to you because of the maturity and at one point the stability of the open source and free software movements. So the possibility exists that some people would like to have their industry back, and the movement we belong to perhaps temporarily destroyed that industry. Now, the idea for a fork of Debian stable, Debian 7.0, 7.2, 7.4, 7.x, has been talked about. The idea is to fork that version of Debian, that Debian that was still and is still Unix-like, the Linux we all knew and had for about 20 years. 20 years. That's an entire generation. That's going away now. But if it could be forked, one could create a Linux of the past and bring it into the future. And perhaps an Indelible Linux or a Crystalline Linux. There would be no regression if a computer program was to be updated. First, it would be a good idea to test it, to make sure features were not removed, or if in the newer version features were removed but other features added. And I've done this in code before. You just have to look at the commit logs, and usually it takes longer to really think about how to create the code you're looking to create than it is to transcribe it from one piece of source code to, say, an older piece of source code. It takes a very long time to write the code originally, but the code you write, it's not really that voluminous, if it's good at least. So if people were interested in new features that were in a newer version, the commit logs could be looked at, and those pieces of code could be backported. Again, I've done this before, to the older software, so there will be no regression. Another thing is, a lot of in the user apps, a lot of the so-called new features are just supporting another device. A lot of times that's just another file or something similar to a file in the source code itself. So that it's not a massive amount of work, as long as someone's interested in it. And there's no problem with old software. Often it's a lot stabler than the newer software, and you know it. You know how to use it. Interfaces aren't changed on you. The parts of your brain that are used to working with that software don't have to be rewritten. And that there's value in that. There's the value in the human mind. People shouldn't be just forced to learn new arbitrary interfaces. Now, the third thing that would be needed to do in a fork would be, well, this is the issue, security. Currently, in many applications, Mozilla being one of them, to have new security updates, you have to upgrade to the newest version and take whatever they're giving you. No longer are security issues backported to older versions. So the problem of security in various applications. This problem, by and large, has already been mitigated by the GrSecurity, the Pax, take them together, GrSecurity patch to the Linux kernel, which is in fact a strong reason to stay on Linux. This patch, copied by Microsoft and Apple in small ways, but GrSecurity is the real deal with Pax. This patch defeats entire classes of vulnerabilities. Buffer overflow exploits. No. They won't work on a GrSecurity patched kernel, for the most part. What will happen is, when the buffer overflow exploit is exploited, and there is an attempt to, inject code, you pass the buffer, and then, of course, execute that code. The execution of that code, that will cause GrSecurity to kill the process. So an exploit results in a crash rather than a theft of whatever data you're trying to protect. And there's memory protection, all different, many classes of exploits are mitigated by GrSecurity. Now, of course, logic problems, just a failure of the programmer to put into code what he really wanted the code to do, many of those have to be patched by hand. But the largest number of problems, buffer overflow exploits, memory corruption, so on and so forth, just read the feature list. They're mitigated by GrSecurity. Now, if there's an application, we used to call them programs, but once the corporates got in control of Linux, and now we call them apps. Right? If there's a program that doesn't work well with GrSecurity and Pax, maybe it's an editor, needs an exploitable, needs a executable stack. On a per binary basis, you can set permissions of whether that part of GrSecurity is enabled for that binary. there's a program called Pax Control, and those of us who have used GrSecurity for a long time, we have scripts that automatically set the most restrictive usable permissions on the various ornery applications we use. Mozilla is one of these applications. You know, Linus used to say he abided by one rule: don't break user space. That had relevance to the kernel, that you wouldn't break interfaces of the kernel that some program in user space was still using. It was to have some stability. But you know, it's kind of strange that he says don't break user space, and then he promotes something that does.